Also today, President Trump says the U.S. military conducted a second strike in recent weeks on a boat allegedly carrying drugs from Venezuela to the U.S. In a social media post, the president warned, quote, "If you are transporting drugs that can kill Americans, we are hunting you." In that same post, he included a short video that allegedly shows the strike, which he said killed 3, quote, male terrorists. Prior to Trump's announcement, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro told reporters that recent incidents between the U.S. and Venezuela are, quote, aggression.
Today, I can announce that the communications with the government of the U.S. are thrown away. They are thrown away by them with their threats of bombs, death, and blackmail. That's not how we operate. With threats and coercion, there will never be anything.
The Trump administration defended its strike earlier this month, saying it was necessary to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. But several Senate Democrats and even some Republicans expressed concerns about the incident and questioned the legality of the action. President Trump today approved the deployment of the National Guard to Memphis, Tennessee, he says to combat crime.
Okay.
In the Oval Office today, Trump signed an order that made the move official. He called it a, quote, replica of his efforts in Washington, D.C., where the National Guard was deployed last month. Trump said members from federal agencies like the FBI and ICE would join the troops. That is despite Memphis police reporting decreases across every major crime category in the first 8 months of 2025 compared to recent years. Turning now to the aftermath of conservative activist Charlie Kirk's assassination last week on a university campus in Utah. FBI Director Kash Patel told Fox News today that investigators found DNA evidence on the scene that matches that of the suspect, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. The evidence was found on a towel wrapped around a rifle and on a screwdriver recovered from the rooftop where the fatal shot was fired. Authorities in Utah are preparing to file capital murder charges against Robinson as early as tomorrow. U.S. officials say they've reached a, quote, framework deal with China over ownership of TikTok. Following 2 days of talks in Spain, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the plan would involve switching the app to U.S. ownership, long a goal for U.S. officials. Bessent said President Trump would speak with China's Xi Jinping on Friday to, quote, complete the deal. TikTok is currently owned by China's ByteDance. Chinese officials would only say a basic framework consensus was reached. President Trump is facing a Wednesday deadline on whether to further extend enforcement of a law that Congress passed last year banning TikTok if it's not separated from its Chinese owner. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer today stressed the importance of America's security concerns.
We were very focused on TikTok and making sure that it was a deal that is fair for the Chinese and completely respects U.S. national security concerns. And that's the deal we reached. And of course, we want to ensure that the Chinese have a fair investment environment in the United States, but always that U.S. national security comes first.
Also today, Chinese regulators said that U.S. chip maker NVIDIA had violated China's anti-monopoly laws and vowed closer scrutiny of the company. In their preliminary findings, officials found NVIDIA didn't comply with certain conditions when it purchased a network and data transmission company back in 2020. NVIDIA says it follows the law, quote, in all respects. The announcement comes after China said this weekend that it's opened an anti-dumping probe into the U.S. chip sector. Back in this country, former federal prosecutor Maureen Comey is suing the Trump administration over her dismissal. Comey says her firing in July was unconstitutional and came without, quote, legitimate explanation. As Assistant U.S. Attorney, Maureen Comey prosecuted hundreds of cases, including those of Jeffrey Epstein, his associate Ghislaine Maxwell, and Sean Diddy Combs. In her lawsuit, she says her firing was due at least in part to her father being James Comey, the former FBI director who President Trump fired in 2017. James Comey has since written a memoir criticizing the Trump administration. The White House is redirecting nearly $500 million in federal funds to historically black colleges and universities, as well as tribal schools. The Education Department says the one-time investment amounts to a 48% increase in funding for HBCUs. The department is also redirecting about $60 million towards charter schools and $137 million to American history and civic grants. But the funds come only after the department slashed $350 million from other grants, mostly involving programs that benefit Hispanic students, among others. On Wall Street today, stocks climbed to new heights ahead of this week's Fed rate decision. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added nearly 50 points on the day. The Nasdaq rose more than 200 points. The S&P 500 climbed to a new all-time high. And the Library of Congress announced Arthur C. as the 25th Poet Laureate of the United States today. C. is a celebrated author and translator. He's written 12 poetry collections and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the library last year. In a statement, C. called it an amazing honor, saying he feels, quote, a great responsibility to promote the ways poetry can impact our daily lives. His appointment comes during a hectic time in the 200-year-old library's history. President Trump fired librarian Carla Hayden in May amid a broader push to reshape Washington's cultural institutions. And CBS says that roughly 7.4 million people tuned in to last night's Emmy Awards. That's the most in 4 years.
And the Emmy goes to The Studio.
Seth Rogen's The Studio won 13 Emmys. That's the most ever for a comedy series. The Pit, which spans one grueling shift at a trauma center, took home the top drama prize. Noah Wyle won his first Emmy 30 years after starring in another medical drama, ER. And it was a bittersweet victory lap for Stephen Colbert.
My friends, I have never loved my country more desperately.
The Late Show won Best Talk Series for the first time in his 10-year run. It comes just months after CBS announced it's being canceled. Still to come on the NewsHour, the influence of conservative PragerU's educational videos and why critics are alarmed. Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest political headlines. And author Lisa Lawson discusses her new book on the neuroscience of adolescence.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.